Be'ezras Hashem. Today's daf is Daf Chof Tes, and we will begin Daf Chof Beis Omid Beis, about 3 lines from the bottom. What we're discussing over here is that the whole concept of Sotah is fascinating, because what the Torah effectively said was that you don't know for sure that this woman did anything with this guy. All we know is that the husband warned, and then she secluded herself with this guy, stranger. So we don't know if they actually had tashmish with each other, which would potentially aser her on her husband. But the Torah gave you a chiddush, and the Torah told you you have to treat it as if for sure she had relations with the guy, and therefore the husband cannot be with her anymore, and he has to take her up to the Beis Hamikdash to drink Sotah waters. That's what we learned so far. But we also learned, so therefore, this woman, although she's a suffix if she had an adulterous relationship, we treat it as a for sure adulterous relationship, and that affects another area. That affects that she cannot eat truma. Let's say her husband is a Kohen. She can't eat truma until she drinks the Sotah waters. Let's say she's a Bas Kohen, a daughter of a Kohen. She's married to Yisrael. As long as she didn't drink the Sotah waters, even if her husband dies, where as a Bas Kohen, she could go back to her parents' home and start eating truma, but in this case, she's an unresolved Zaina, so to speak, and therefore she cannot eat truma. We learned that yesterday. Now we mentioned something that we saw yesterday too. That Rabbi Akiva said that she can't eat truma. Comes along Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Yishmael says not only that, as long as she didn't drink the Sotah waters and her husband died, right? So it's up in limbo. She cannot marry a Kohen either. Rabbi Yishmael had this whole Kal V'chomer that she can't marry a Kohen, and it went like this: the Kal V'chomer is a divorcee is permitted to eat truma, but cannot marry a Kohen, right? A divorcee Bas Kohen, right? If she's a divorcee and she could go back to her father's house and eat truma, but she can no longer marry a Kohen because she's a divorcee. So this Sotah, which we just established that she can't eat truma, certainly she cannot marry a Kohen. So the Gemara's question is, Rabbi Yishmael, he retorted to Rabbi Akiva that this Sotah cannot marry a Kohen. Amar Rabbi Akiva truma. Rabbi Akiva was discussing whether this Sotah can eat truma. Umahada leihu kahuna, and Rabbi Yishmael responded, she can't marry a Kohen. It seems like that Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva having two different conversations. Not only that, Vasu, I'll ask you another question. According to Rabbi Akiva, that the Sotah cannot eat truma because he used the pasuk for truma. The kahuna manole. How do you know that the Sotah can never marry a Kohen as long as she didn't drink the Sotah waters? If her husband dies, how do you know she can't marry a Kohen? Rabbi Yishmael learned it from a Kal V'chomer, and Rabbi Akiva didn't even discuss it. Maybe he holds the Sotah could marry a Kohen. So the Gemara says, no, it's not. The Gemara wants to know, the Gemara is going to say that, look, Rabbi Akiva cannot hold that a Sotah, Sotah can go ahead and marry a Kohen. But Rachi Tema, the reason Rabbi Akiva didn't discuss it, because Kahuna like Tzricha Kra, that Rabbi Akiva held that for her not to marry a Kohen, I don't even need a pasuk to tell me that. Since already we know that the Torah treats her as a for sure that she had relations with the strange guy, so she's an Ashes Ish who had an affair with somebody. That's the way the Torah looks at it. So certainly, if the husband dies, she can't marry a Kohen. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that. The Gemara says, we go to Chav Tes Amud Aleph, that's not Shara Asa Ba Safik Zaina Kazayna, because the Torah treated her, although we're not sure that she's a Zaina, we don't know for a fact that she slept with the guy, we know she secluded it, the Torah says treat it as if she's a Zaina, as if she certainly slept with the guy. Okay, if that's the case, then Truma Nami Loy Tibaya Kra. Then for her not to eat Truma, I don't need a separate pasuk. Rabbi Akiva had a separate pasuk to teach you an extra v'nitma'a, to teach you that she cannot eat truma. I don't need a pasuk for that. Use the same logic. Like the Torah tells you, treat her although she's a suffix Zaina, treat her like a regular Zaina. Every Zaina, any woman, any Kohen, Bas Kohen, that had an illicit affair with somebody. Let's say a Bas Kohen had a fling with a mamzer. So she can't go home now and eat truma because finished. She had an illicit relationship. So if this Ashes Ish if we consider her as an Ashes Ish that had an illicit relationship, certainly when her husband dies, she cannot go and have truma. From the fact that Rabbi Akiva says not so fast, right? I need a pasuk to teach you that she can't eat truma. So I should also need a pasuk to teach you that she cannot marry a kohen. And so how do you know? The bottom line is, how does Rabbi Akiva know that she cannot marry a kohen? Ella, says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva, abo kroi ksibe. There are 4 psukim that tell you that everything about a site you need to know. One pasuk tells you, it says v'nitma'ah, and it says nitma 3 times, and one time it says v'nitma'ah. So that's counted as an extra time with above. So you have 4 nitma'ahs, so to speak. Chad one time tells you that a site, as long as she didn't drink the waters, labal, she cannot continue sleeping with her husband. Chad laboil, and one teaches you that she cannot have a relationship with the adulterer. If the husband dies, she cannot go marry the boil. The chad, one pasuk nitma tells me likahuna, when her husband died and she didn't drink the site water, she cannot marry a kohen. The chad, and one pasuk teaches you that she can no longer eat truma. That is the way Rabbi Akiva learned it. So, but Rabbi Shmuel does not darshan vav. So really, according to Rabbi Shmuel, you have 3 psukim. And how do you know a kohen? She can't marry a kohen. That you know from a kal v'chayma. That's what the Gemara is saying. Rabbi Shmuel, tlosei kroi ksibi. There's 3 psukim. Chad lebal, chad leboil, chad letruma. One that she can have relations with the husband. One she cannot marry the adulterer, and one she can't eat truma. Ukuhuna asim a kal v'chayma, and she can't marry kohen. I'll know from a kal v'chayma. Madacha grusha, who could eat truma, cannot marry a kohen. This soita, who cannot eat truma, because we have a pasuk she can't eat truma, certainly she cannot marry a kohen. Says the Gemara, wait a second, we have one v'nitma'ah that tells you this soita cannot do something. Maybe it's only telling you, according to Rabbi Shmuel, that she cannot marry a kohen, and that truma, you have no kal v'chayma, and therefore with truma, she would be allowed to eat truma. That's what the Gemara's question is. Rabbi Shmuel, how do you know the pasuk is needed for truma to tell you that the soita cannot eat truma? Ukuna asya b'kal v'chayma, and she cannot marry a kohen. You're going to learn from a kal v'chayma. Dilma, maybe ki itzrach l'kuhuna. I'll tell you that the extra pasuk only tells you she cannot marry a kohen. Utruma sharyet, but she'll always be permitted to eating truma. So maybe, according to Rabbi Shmuel, a woman who's a saita could perhaps go back to her father's house and eat truma, as long as if it ended up in limbo and she never drank the saita waters. How do you know that she'll also eat truma? Al Malach, Rabbi Shmuel says, Vitstavra, by logical understanding, I would say that extra nitma'ah has to be similar to the other nitma'ahs. Dumya de bal uboil. It has to be similar to the other nitmas. The other nitmas aser the soita on the husband, and the aser hers on the boil. Ma bal boil mechaim. Those are things that she's not allowed to have relations with her husband is when the husband's still alive. Uboil, she cannot have relations with the adulterer is the husband still alive, because if he divorced her, she cannot go ahead and marry the boil. That's what the Chumash is saying. Af truma. So when the Torah is telling you another pasuk that she's not allowed to do something, right? And the pasuk is telling you that she's not allowed to do something. Name mechayim. It's also talking about while the husband is still alive. That means that if the husband divorced her or whatever it is, she cannot go back to her house and start eating truma. La puke kuhuna le'achamisa. But to tell you that she can't marry a kohen, that could only occur after the husband died. Because if the husband divorced her, certainly she can't marry a kohen. I don't need a pasuk to tell you she can't marry a kohen. It's only if the husband died and she didn't drink the saita waters, if that's the only scenario where the pasuk would be telling you that she can't marry a kohen. But that's not in line with the other nitma'os, which refer to something she cannot do while the husband is still alive. So therefore, I wouldn't say that pasuk is talking about a situation where the kohen died, where the husband died. It's talking about a case where the husband's still alive, and it's answering her on something. What is it answering this lady? On truma. So that's the bottom line. Rabbi Shmuel learns that she's usher to the Baal, Boil, and Truma, and she's also to marry a kohen from Bakal v'choymer. Now Rabbi Kiva, why didn't he learn like Rabbi Shmuel? Because Dumya the Baal Boil Leslie, he would say that I don't need necessarily the last nitma to teach you that she's also betruma. Maybe that's only teaching you that she cannot marry a kohen, and I don't need it to be congruent or very similar to the other vinitmas. It could be different, and therefore I would say that she would be permitted to eat truma. That's why Rabbi Akiva actually needed 4 psukim. The iname, or another reason why Rabbi Akiva needed 4 nitmas, so to speak, Islay, because Rabbi Akiva holds milsa the asya bekal v'choymer tarach v'kasav lakra. Many times in the Chumash, you'll find things that you could figure out on your own. With the Kal v'choymer, the Torah wrote it out for you anyway, specifically. So ends the sugya. So the bottom line at the ending of this sugya is we learned both Rabbi Kiva and both Rabbi Shmuel hold a soita is usher on 4 things. Remember those 4 things. She's now going to have relations with her husband. If the husband gives her a divorce, she can't go marry the adulterer. And this is only as long as she didn't drink soita water, right? And if the husband gives her a divorce and she didn't drink the soita water, she can't go eat truma. And because the Torah treats her like a for sure zoina. And also, if the husband died, right? If the husband died, she can't go marry a kohen. She's also a kohen. Rabbi Kiva learns it out from 4 times it says v'nitma. Rabbi Yishmael learns it out from 3 times it says v'nitma. And the usher to a kohen, he learns from a kal v'chomer. Nu Gemara. Amar Rabbi Gidol Amar Rab. Rabbi Gidol said in the name of Rab. We learned yesterday that there's an extrapolation. The fact that the Torah said that we treat a soita like it's a suffix, you don't know she slept with somebody, but you treat it as a vade, for sure, she's awesome, right? So we learned something else, that sometimes when a person has a suffix tuma, he doesn't know if, let's say he's holding a sheretz in his hand, a dead sheretz, and he doesn't know if he touched this food or not. It depends. If it's in Rosh Yachid, the food is tameh. If it's in Rosh Hashanah, the food is tahar. Because that's how you say, suffix tuma. If it's Rosh Yachid, is also tameh, just like a soite, which is a suffix tuma. Suffix, if she became defiled, we treat it as if for sure she became defiled and nitma. But we said that it has to be similar to a soite. In what way does it have to be similar to a soite? It has to be that a situation where a guy is holding a sheretz and he doesn't know if he touched food items. But if, let's say, you have a situation where the item, let's say the sheretz fell from the sky and it dropped down right next to a food item, and I don't know if the sheretz touched the food or not. Well, there's no human involvement over here, then it would be tahar. Why would it be tar? Because if you're extrapolating it from soita is dealing with humans. There are humans involved. And therefore, only then will you say sveke tameh in Rosh Hashanah. But if there's no human interaction, you just find a sheretz that fell from the sky, a dead sheretz that fell from the sky next to a food item, and you don't know if it hit, it will be considered tahar. And you learn it from soita. So the Gemara asks, Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav, Dava sheyesh by das lishal, the aim by das lishal. If it's tameh, it's only tameh if there's a human that you could ask, and he doesn't know the answer, or if there's no human involved, so then it's tahar. He says, I don't need it to learn it from soita. I could learn it from a real pasuk in the Torah, Mahaikra Nafka. From this pasuk, take a look. Bahabasar, you have a piece of meat. Ashiyiga b'chol tameh lo yechal. If it touches anything that became tameh, you're not allowed to eat it. So now, so it has to touch for sure something that is tameh. Bade tameh hu delayach. If you know for sure this piece of meat touched a for sure food, it touched a for sure davar tameh, then you're not allowed to eat the meat, the kosher meat. Ha suffix, but if you're not sure if the kosher meat touched the davar tameh, the suffix tar, you don't know if it's tameh or tar, yeyachel, then you can eat the piece of meat. So if you have suffix tamei and suffix, you're not sure. Then if it touched it, then you should go. You go lenient. Aim is safer. But then there's another pasuk that says the habasar, the meat, kol tar yochel basar. A man who is for sure tar, only then you could eat kachim. But vaday tar hu yochel basar. The man himself, if he's for sure tar, only then can he eat kachim meat. Ha suffik tamei v'suffik tar. But if the man himself is not sure if he's tamei, not sure he's tar, lo yochel. He's not allowed to eat the kachim meat. So how do you square off these two psukim? One pasuk says a suffix is permitted. If a suffix tuma, we don't say that that you can't eat it. You can't eat the piece of meat. And here, if the man is a suffix tamei, we say you can't eat the piece of meat. So how do you square off these two psukim? Elalav shma bino. From here you can derive kansh yesh boy das li shoel. When you're dealing with a human like the second pasuk, and the human himself is not sure if he's tamei or not, so then you should treat him as if he is tamei, and therefore he cannot eat kachim meat. But in the previous case, is talking about the meat touching some other food item that's tamei, and we don't know if that food item is tamei or tahar. So then we say that meat does not become tamei because she'ein b'das li shoel, because you're dealing with two inanimate objects of a piece of meat touching another piece of meat. So if the one piece of meat, if the kachim meat touch something that is suffix, if it's tamei or not, or if you don't know if this piece of meat touched the other piece of meat, you'll go lenient. So we see that there is another limud for yesh b'das li shoel. And ein by das lishoel will you go strict. So why do I need to learn it from Sotah when I have really psukim in the Chumash that tell you that same idea? Suffix tuma, if there's a human involved, you go strict. If there's no human involvement in there, and it's just a plain suffix tuma between two inanimate objects, like a piece of meat tamei and a suffix piece of meat tamei touching another kachim piece of meat, you say you go lenient. So why do you need both pasukim? So the Gemara answers, I need to learn from Rav Gidl Amarav, I need to learn it from Sotah. If I learned it from Rav, if you didn't learn anything from Sotah, I would say that anytime you have a doubt with a human being, even in a Rishus Rabim, right? You should always go strict, and therefore you should always say it's tamei. So that's why it's rach lemigmar misayta. That's why you have to learn this ideas from Sotah that only b'rshus yachid you go strict. B'rshus rabim, even though there's a human involved in the situation, you will go lenient. Sotah, if I learned it only from Sotah, havamina, I would think the ikadas negeo magia that in order for you to go strict, right, you have to have two humans involved, because by Sotah, the reason you're going strict over here because she's involved and the adulterer is involved. That's why the Torah says suffix tuma. But let's say I would say that only applies if you have a man who's tar and a man who's tamei, and you don't know if they touched each other. Then in a rishus yachid, then you go tamei. But what about if the man is a tamei and he doesn't know if he touched this piece of meat in a rishus this piece of meat in a rishus yachid? Since there's only one man involved, I would think you go lenient. That's why you have to learn it from these psukim that says that even though there's only one man involved, because the second pasuk is v'habasar, a piece of meat, and it's called tahar yochel basar. Only if he's a completely tar person, then he can eat the meat. But if there's a suffix tuma, even though there's one man, then you still go strict. So the bottom line is that suffix tuma b'rshus hayachid is tamei. B'rshus Rabim is tahar, and only suffix tuma b'rshus yachid you say tamei is if there's one human involved in the situation. For example, if the person is holding a sheretz and he doesn't know if he touched this piece of food, this tar food, but if it's no human involved, ein b'das lishol, then we go lenient and it's not tamei. New Gemara. The Gemara said a very interesting thing, that by Truma, there's a concept of a Shlishi. Okay, we're going to just learn two more things, and that's it for today. The first thing we said that you're familiar with chulin. There's an avatuma, then there's a rishon latuma. Chulin can become a sheni's latuma, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that that truma could become a shlishi latuma. So chulin can become a sheni, and truma would become a shlishi. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says there's really no source really from the Torah that truma should become a shlishi. Maybe it should only become a sheni like chulin, and there's no next step of it becoming a shlishi. So the Gemara is going to say now we're going to learn it from a kal v'chomer. I'm putting it up on the screen. What would be the kal v'chomer? The kal v'chomer would say like this: a tful yom. A tful yom is a guy who went to the mikveh. He was an avatuma. Let's say he's a zav, and he went to the mikveh and he's tahar, right? And he didn't have the sun set on him. So then that person, we know he could eat chulin, right? He could eat chulin because he went to the mikveh already, but he's not allowed to eat truma until sunset, right? So he's a person that can eat chulin and not eat truma. So take a look, a piece of bread that it itself is a sheni l'tuma. The chulin bread, if it itself is a sheni l'tuma, so it itself is tameh, certainly it could be metama truma. So we see that it can make a chulin, which is a sheni, can make a truma to be, chulin would be number 2, and the truma will be number 3. So that's how you know. That's what the Gemara says. But the Gemara says, what about it? The tful yom at least was one time an avatum if it was a zav. The bread can never become an avatuma. Bread, food items are only rishon l'tuma. So that's why tful yom could mitama truma. But bread, chulin bread, maybe cannot be mitrama truma because it can never become an avatuma. So the Gemara then says, wait a second, tful yom, it doesn't necessarily come from an avatuma. You could have a tful yom that's a rishon l'tuma. How is a tful yom a rishon l'tuma? If this man touched a sheretz, he is a rishon l'tuma. And if he becomes a tful yom, so he was never an avatuma. So he's similar to bread. But the Gemara says, yeah, but he's a man. A man could potentially become an avatuma. And that's why men who are just getting out of tuma could be mitrame truma. But bread never has a possibility to become an avatuma. So bread, maybe bread cannot be mitame truma. So the Gemara brings one last thing into the equation, a kli cheres. A kli cheres is an earthenware kalim. And the Torah says about an earthenware kalim that it can never become an avatum. It cannot become an avatum. So how does an earthenware kalim become tameh? If you drop a sheretz in the airspace, the kalim becomes a risha l'tama. It can be metama. Any food item that's in it, whether it's chulin or truma, could become tameh through this kli cheres. So we see that it's not the concept of something becoming an avatuma could be metama truma. We find something that can never become an avatuma, like a kli cheres, could be metama truma. So we will say over here that bread, which is a sheni l'tuma, it itself could also make a shlishi l'truma. And that's how the Gemara ends. But the Gemara is going to say that's not enough because a kli cheres has a chumrah, has a stringency that how does it become tameh? You don't even have to touch a kli cheres. You could have a sheretz just float in the airspace and the kli cheres becomes tameh. So a kli cheres has a chumrah that bread doesn't have. So, but then again, kli cheres does the tful yom. Then you'll say you'll learn it from tful yom. Tful yom has a chumrah that bread doesn't have. So since they both don't have the same chumras, we see that the Torah is strict and says that, listen, even though it doesn't have these chumras, it could be metame truma. Each one doesn't have the stringency of the other. It's metame truma. So also, I will say that bread, a chulin sheni bread could be metame truma. I just spoke out the whole Gemara, so you'll hop it inside. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So the Gemara is now, ma'acha de'ein loy lama tameh. If we don't know a source of a shlishi l'truma, how do you know that a shlishi could become truma? The Mishnah said, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was concerned, people are going to forget that there's a possibility of a shlishi by truma. Rabbi Yehuda Rav, you're right, there is no source that the Chumash says that a truma could become a shlishi. But you learn it midin kal v'choyme yeshla. You could figure it out on your own. A tful yom, a guy who went to the mikvah. So really, he's allowed to eat chulin food. If he touches truma, the truma becomes a shlishi because the tful yom, in some ways, has a din like a sheni. Kika sheni shepasa b'chulim, a loaf of bread that it itself is a shein l'truma. So it itself has tuma on it. Certainly, it could make a shlishi b'truma. So that is a nice kal v'chomer to show you a concept of shlishi b'truma. The Gemara says, but I could ask you back. How does a person become a tvul yom? At one time, you were an avatuma. Let's say you were a zav, and therefore you went to the mikvah. So you went to the mikvah, you waited the 7 days, went to the mikvah. So since at one time you were an av, therefore we'll give you the strictness that you could be metamet truma. But the kikar shenik was never an av. A bread, a loaf of bread, no matter, even if it touches anything, will always be a rishon l'tuma. So therefore, maybe it doesn't be metamet truma. The Gemara says, Teisi, then I'll learn it out, mitul yom the sheretz. At tvul yom, we go to Amid Beis, Chavtes Amid Beis, that a tvul yom, that from a sheretz, somebody who just touched the sheretz, a human that just touched the sheretz, is a rishon l'tuma. So he was a rishon. He wasn't an av, and yet he could be metamet truma. So also, I will say the kikar shenik, which was not an av truma, could be metamet truma. The Gemara says no, but b'mal tvul yom, any human being, tvul yom, the sheretz, shekaim b'minai avatuma. Humans themselves have a possibility of being an avatuma. Therefore, when they are a tvul yom, they could be metamet truma. Unlike a piece of bread that's a sheni, it can never have been a situation where a bread was an avatuma. Maybe I won't give it the power to be metamet truma, to be a shlishi. So the Gemara says, kli cheres yerchiach. I'll prove it from an earthenware keli. So what is a kli cheres? A kli cheres that becomes only a rishon. A kli cheres, an earthenware keli, unlike a metal, a becher could become an avatuma. If it's made out of earthenware, the Torah says it could only become a rishon. And it could be metamet truma. So we see that something that is not an avatuma can never be an avatuma, could be metamet truma. So I'll say bread that's a sheni could be metamet truma into a shlishi. You're going to ask, Malach kli cheres, shekei metamet bavira. But kli cheres has a strictness that it's susceptible to tuma by just floating a piece of sheretz into its airspace. Unlike a piece of bread, in order for a bread to become tameh, it has to actually touch something. So then tvul yom yechiach. Tvul yom doesn't have that power. A human becomes tameh only by touching, not something. If he's in the airspace of something of a sheretz, he doesn't become tameh. So tvul yom doesn't have the strictness of a kli cheres, and yet it could be metamet truma. So the chayzer din. This is the most important point of what the sugya. You learn it from two sources, from kli cheres and tvul yom. The strictness of tvul yom, that it could become an avatuma, is not like the strictness of kli cheres, which can never become an avatuma. A kli cheres, which becomes tameh even in its airspace, suspending a sheretz in its airspace, is not like like tvul yom, which can never become tameh by being in airspace of something. But hatzad the shava b'shem, but they both have one common denominator, shemetamin. This is supposed to say shemetamin b'chulin. They can make chulin that tameh by chulin, or by tvul yom, who's permitted b'chulin. Tvul yom is mutter b'chulin, u'paislim b'truma, and it pasels truma. They could be metameh truma. Oshken kikar sheni shepaisel b'chulin, the paisel b'truma. So I'll say a kikar sheni, which would be pasel, but in itself is tameh, certainly can make a shlishi in truma. So now, but then the question remains, so if I learn it from two sources, I learn a shlishi, I learn it from a kal v'chomer of truma, from tvul yom, and from kli cheres. So the question was, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai said, but I'm afraid that future generations are going to shoo away with this kal v'chomer. Why? What kind of question can they going to have on this kal v'chomer? V'dor acha porich ma latzad shovish behem shikesh behem tzad choma. The next generation is going to come along and say, each if you're learning it from tvul yom and kli cheres, but the bottom line, each one has a strictness to it. That's why it's metamet truma. But a kikar sheni doesn't have any strictness to it. So why should it be metamet truma? So they'll just shoo away the whole idea of a loaf of bread that's a sheni to be metamet truma. They'll say that it doesn't work. That's what future generation. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was very nervous about that. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai tzad chumra lo parach. He would not ask such a question, because as long as the two things that are metamet truma don't have the same tzad chumra, then we see that the chumrat part of it is not what causes it to be mitama truma. It's just an idea that a sheni could make a shlishi, or something that is tame could be mitame kulin and could be mitame truma to become a shlishi. So the bottom line is that we find a source from a kal v'choime that truma could become a shlishi. One last piece of the Gemara, and then we'll stop. The last piece of the Gemara, says, now there's a concept that you could get to the level 3 by truma. You could Tulin gets to level 2 of truma, and then it stops. Truma gets to level 3. A piece of kachim meat can get to level 4 of truma. And how do you know that? I knew we learned in a brisa. Amar Rabbi Yosef said, "Menayin l'revi b'kodesh pasam." How do I know that if something that's a revi, that will be the final stop for a kachim? How do you know that? Mara says, "V'dinhu." I'll make it from a kal v'chomer. Ma mechusa kippurim. I'll just bring it up on the screen. A mechusa kippurim. It's a new thing. Mechusa kippurim, as you know, is somebody. Let's say a yoledes. She was tamei. Now she waited her 40 days, and then she went to the mikvah. Now she could eat truma. At the end of that night, she could eat truma, but she cannot eat kachim as long as she didn't bring her birds of kach. She's missing. She didn't bring the karbonas, so she's permitted to eat truma, but she cannot eat kachim. So shlishi, if you have a piece of shlishi of truma, right, a piece of shlishi, a food item, which is a shlishi of truma, certainly could be mekame kachim. Right, we see something that's cannot be mitame truma is mitame kachim. So shlishi itself, which is a truma, a tamei, should be able to be mitame kachim, and that's a beautiful source. That's what Gemara. Ma mechusa kippurim. A mechusa kippurim, let's say from a zav or yoledes, shemuta betruma, is permitted to eat truma, pasul b'kodesh, but cannot eat kachim. The Torah says mechusa kippurim cannot eat kachim. Shlishi shepasul b'truma. If you have a food item, a truma item, which is already a shlishi, certainly it will be able to be mitama kachim. So now the Gemara wants to say, but you have to have a source that kodesh could become a shlishi. Maybe kodesh can only become a sheni. How do you know that kodesh could become a shlishi? Because if you don't have a source from the Torah that kodesh could become a shlishi, then the kal v'chomer will only teach you that kodesh could become a shlishi. It's only because you know for a fact that kodesh could become a shlishi, the kal v'chomer could take you to the next step of revi. But if you don't know that kachim can become a shlishi from the Torah, then the kal v'chomer cannot teach you revi'i. It'll jump a step. So shlishi kodesh min Torah min ha'olam. How do you know that kachim could become a shlishi? The ksiv, because the pasuk says, "B'habasa asher yiga b'chol tomei lo ye'echel." Any basar that touches tamei, you cannot eat it. Now listen to this. The Torah says any piece of meat that touched anything that became tamei. For example, you have a sheretz that fell into a sheretz, which is an avatuma, touches a kli cheres, which becomes a rishon l'tuma. The rishon l'tuma, it makes the food in the kli cheres tamei. So now the Torah says, "V'habasar," if you have a kachim piece of meat, asher yiga b'chol tamei, that touched the food that was in the kli cheres. That food that's in the kli cheres was a sheni l'tuma, lo ye'achel. You can't eat that kachim meat. Mila yaskinim, we see a kachim meat, the noga b'sheni that touches a sheni, amarachmona lo ye'achel. You can't eat it. So we have a source of shlishi, a level shlishi from kachim. Yovi, so therefore, you go down another notch because mikal v'chomer from kal v'chomer kedarno, like I just explained. So that will end today's daf. The Gemara just gave you sources that for tulib, it could go sheni. That's written in the Torah. Then from kal v'chomer, one will learn that there's a level 3 of truma. There's something called a shlishi truma, and another kal v'chomer will teach you that there's a level revi'i by kachem. Okay. A good Shabbos.